Choi Ji-ho, standing on the sidewalk, stared intently at the entrance of the most luxurious restaurant in Seoul. His eyes, normally calm and calculating, were now filled with a storm of emotions. He adjusted the worn hat on his head, lowering it to hide his well-known face. That night would not be easy, but it was necessary. Dressed in simple, dark, dusty clothes, he would go unnoticed by anyone who didn't know him. The disguise was part of the plan he had devised to expose the truth. Minji, the beautiful fiancée of his son, Junseo, was about to be tested in a way she could never have imagined. It wasn't easy for Ji-ho to question someone's intentions, especially when that person was about to enter his family. But something about Minji's behavior around wealth had always bothered him. It was subtle, of course, but Ji-ho had lived long enough to notice the little things. The sparkle in her eyes when she entered mansions, the veiled comments about material possessions, and the incessant curiosity about the family business. Junseo, blinded by love, had never noticed, but Ji-ho had observed closely. Minji arrived promptly, as always, displaying a radiant smile as she approached the restaurant. Her steps were elegant, and she was impeccably dressed, each piece of clothing carefully chosen to highlight her figure and style. Ji-ho felt a tightness in his heart upon seeing her. If he was wrong, that night could ruin his relationship with his son forever. But if he was right, he could save Junseo from a future disaster. He took a deep breath and entered the restaurant just behind her, keeping his distance. He watched as Minji was greeted by one of the attendants with a warm smile and led to a table in the center of the dining room, near the window, where she would have a panoramic view of the city. Minji loved views, especially those that involved Seoul's illuminated skyline. It was as if the glow of the lights represented the kind of life she desired. As soon as Minji settled in, Ji-ho took his position. He approached the table disguised as a needy worker, rubbing his hands to ward off the chill that wasn't even that strong. His expression was now that of someone pleading for a chance. He knew that first impressions would be crucial. He needed to test Minji's generosity and empathy before moving forward with any more elaborate plans. Ji-ho began, "I'm sorry to bother you, miss." His voice hoarse and tired. "But could you help me with something? I'm out of work, and I haven't eaten anything all day. Maybe you could help me with a plate of food." Minji initially cast a quick, almost automatic glance in Ji-ho's direction. Her eyes sparkled with brief surprise before turning cold, almost calculating. She frowned and, in an almost imperceptible gesture, adjusted her expensive purse on the table, as if Ji-ho's mere presence were a threat to her polished lifestyle. "I'm sorry," she replied, forcing a polite but distant smile, "but this is not a good time. I'm waiting for someone important and, well, you should seek help elsewhere." Her tone was dry, and Ji-ho sensed the indifference in every word. To her, he was just an annoyance, an obstacle in her path to social success. Ji-ho slightly tilted his head, studying her reactions carefully. His gaze followed Minji's facial expressions, and he noticed that although she was polite in her refusal, she showed not a hint of empathy. He took another step, forcing vulnerability into his voice. "I just need a little food. That's all. I know you must be a generous person." Minji sighed, this time not bothering to hide her irritation. She picked up the phone from the table and began typing something frantically, completely ignoring Ji-ho. To her, That man was invisible. I already told you I can't help you. Don't insist. Those words sounded like a final blow. Jiho took a step back, his chest tight with the confirmation he feared. She was not the right person for his son. Choi Jiho, with a heavy heart, knew he had to move forward with the plan. Despite the tightness in his chest at seeing Minji treat someone with such coldness, there was still a chance that it was all just a misunderstanding. Maybe she was distracted. Maybe the evening had worn her out. Or perhaps she was worried about something bigger. He wanted to believe that, wanted to think that Minji had a good heart. But time was running out, and Jiho had no more room for hesitation. As he stepped away, Jiho walked around the dining room, positioning himself strategically near the counter, where he could observe without being noticed. He removed his hat, trying to appear just like another customer, coming in and out of the luxurious restaurant. The atmosphere was impeccable, with soft lighting, classical music in the background, and the discreet laughter of couples enjoying a romantic night. However, for Jiho, that place now felt like an arena, and he was about to witness an emotional battle. Soon, a well-dressed young man entered the restaurant, confidently walking to the table where Minji was seated. It was Jiho's boss, Kim Daeho, a business magnate whom Jiho had known for decades. Daeho was respected and feared in the corporate world, and Jiho had carefully planned for him to be present that night. The test would continue, but in a much more dangerous way. "Good evening, Miss Minji," Daeho said with a smooth smile, leaning slightly to greet her. "I heard Junseo couldn't make it tonight, but I'm very happy to be here in his place." Minji blinked quickly, surprised by the change of plans, but soon regained her composure. "Ah, of course, Mr. Kim. What an honor to have you here," she replied, with a smile that masked her confusion. "I didn't know that Junseo wouldn't be coming." Daeho gestured with his hand, apologizing. "My young apprentice had a last-minute emergency, but he asked me to make sure you wouldn't be alone tonight. I hope you don't mind." Minji smiled, but there was something in her eyes that Jiho noticed immediately. A different sparkle, a kind of admiration she had never shown when talking about Junseo. Her gaze traveled the imposing figure of Daeho, clearly impressed by his powerful presence and the status he represented. As the conversation progressed, Jiho watched closely, his hands gripping the edge of the counter. Minji seemed like a different person interacting with Daeho. She was more engaging, laughing at jokes in an exaggerated way, lightly touching his arm as if to make it clear that she was delighted by his company. Jiho felt a pang of discomfort. He knew that Daeho was just following the plan, but he couldn't ignore Minji's opportunistic behavior. "By the way, Miss Minji," Daeho began in a more serious tone, "I've heard rumors about your interests. I particularly admire women who have vision for the future, who understand the value of opportunities." Minji leaned slightly forward, curious. "Opportunities, Mr. Kim?" Daeho nodded, his eyes observing every detail of her reaction. "Yes, Junseo told me about your interest in investing in the future, in being part of something greater, and that impressed me. There are few people with that genuine ambition." She laughed softly, hiding her surprise but clearly intrigued by the direction of the conversation. "Oh, yes. I've always been very determined. I think ambition is the key to achieving everything in life, right?" "Exactly," Daeho replied, leaning in a little closer, his voice soft but laden with intention. "And I am looking for people like that for some special projects. something that can change the lives of those involved. Minji fell silent for a moment, absorbing those words. Her eyes sparkled with a mix of fascination and desire. That sounds amazing, Mr. Kim. I would love to know more. Jiho, on the other side of the room, felt a wave of sadness. Minji's unbridled ambition was clearly on display. She didn't even hesitate to approach Daeho, a man much older than her fiancé, if it meant an opportunity for social climbing. The coldness with which she had ignored his humble request for help moments before now contrasted sharply with the exaggerated excitement she displayed in front of Daeho. "Well," Daeho said, reclining in his chair and smiling as if he were about to reveal a secret. "I think we can talk more about this. But, of course, we need to see if you truly have what it takes to be part of this exclusive circle." Minji smiled back, leaning in even further, completely engaged. "I am ready for any test you want, Mr. Kim." Jiho closed his eyes for a brief moment. The trap was being set, and Minji was revealing herself exactly as he feared. Jiho continued to observe every detail, feeling the weight of his emotions building like a storm about to explode. He didn't want to believe that Minji was capable of something so petty, but the way she seemed increasingly interested in Daeho made it clear that her intentions were not pure. And the worst part of all was that the real test was still to come. Daeho, maintaining his confident and powerful demeanor, signaled to the waiter, requesting an expensive bottle of wine. He looked at Minji as if assessing her more closely, but what Jiho knew was that this assessment was part of the game, a game to unmask Minji's true nature. "Minji, I would like to make you a proposal," Daeho said, pouring 2 glasses of wine and offering one to her. "But first, I need to know if you are truly willing to sacrifice certain things for the future you desire. Great opportunities do not come without costs." Minji took a sip of the wine, her eyes fixed on Daeho's. "I have always known that nothing in life is free, Mr. Kim. If I have to make sacrifices, I am prepared." The response was quick, with no hesitation, and it pierced Jiho like a cold blade. He wanted to believe that Minji was just being polite, but the readiness with which she agreed and showed willingness for any cost made him question everything they had shared. The love, the affection he thought was real, began to fragment in his mind. Daeho smiled, satisfied. "That's what I hope to hear. You know, Minji, there are circles in society that are not accessible to everyone. They are people who hold true power and control, those who are behind everything that happens. Junseo is just starting in this world, but I am already established." Minji leaned in even further, as if she wanted to absorb every word. "I would like to be part of that. I think I have a lot to offer, and I know I can be a great ally." "I have no doubt about that," Daeho replied, watching her closely. "But as I said, you need to demonstrate your worth, your commitment. Junseo is a talented young man, but he is naive. The world I live in requires a certain cunning." At that moment, Jiho realized that the tone of the conversation was shifting. Daeho was preparing the final blow, the ultimate test that would unmask Minji once and for all. He continued to watch, his heart tight, as the game unfolded before his eyes. "Minji," Daeho said, his voice deeper, "the truth is, to stand out, you'll need to show that you're willing to leave behind any emotional ties that could interfere with your success. And that includes Junseo." Minji's eyes widened for a brief second, but she quickly composed herself. "Leave Junseo?" She let out a nervous laugh, as if the idea were absurd. But there was something in her expression that did not go unnoticed by Jiho, a glimmer of consideration, a possibility. "Yes," Daeho replied firmly. "If you want to enter this circle, you need to be willing to prioritize business and opportunities over any personal relationship. Junseo is good, but he's not ready for this level. And frankly, Minji, I think you are. But that requires a difficult decision." That sentence lingered in the air for a few seconds. Jiho could hardly believe what he was hearing. Daeho was offering Minji a choice, and how she reacted could determine the future of everything. It was the moment of truth, and each second felt like an eternity as Minji pondered the proposal. She bit her lip, clearly struggling with her thoughts. Her gaze drifted to the wine, swirling the glass in her hand as she assessed her options. And then finally, she spoke. "I understand what you're saying, Mr. Kim. Junseo is important to me, but I've always known that to achieve great things, sacrifices are necessary." Her voice was soft, measured. "If this is what it takes, then I am willing to consider." Those words hit Jiho with the force of a blow. She had not rejected the idea. On the contrary, she was considering leaving him for an empty promise of power and status. His heart, once full of love and hope, was now consumed by a deep, bitter pain. Minji, the woman he thought was loyal, was revealing herself to be someone who placed her ambition above any true feeling. Daeho nodded slowly, as if he were satisfied with the answer. "That's the right attitude, Minji. But don't worry. You don't have to make the decision now. We'll continue discussing the details, and when the right moment comes, you'll know what to do." The conversation continued, but Jiho was no longer listening. His mind was in turmoil, his vision blurred with disappointment. He knew the truth about Minji had been revealed, and the plan was working. But at what cost? Jiho quietly stepped away, leaving the restaurant with a broken heart and an immense weight on his shoulders. Night was falling over Seoul, and Jiho walked the illuminated streets, feeling the cold wind cut across his face. But the pain inside him was much more intense. Every word he had heard from Minji in the restaurant echoed in his mind, as if he were trapped in a nightmare from which he could not wake. The person he thought he loved was willing to trade him for a dream of greatness that was nothing but an illusion. His disappointment was immense, but his mission was not yet over. Back in the small apartment he shared with Junseo, Jiho sat on the couch, looking at the place where so many happy memories had been built. It was there that he and Junseo had grown up together, like brothers, sharing moments of triumph and failure. Now, the weight of the responsibility to protect Junseo from Minji was on his shoulders. He knew he could not keep this truth hidden for much longer. A few hours passed until Junseo entered the apartment, a carefree smile on his face, as if the world around him were intact. He had no idea what had happened that night. Jiho looked at him, his heart heavy with the burden of the secret he carried. "Hyung, how was dinner with Mr. Kim?" Junseo asked, throwing his backpack on the floor and stretching. "Do you think Minji did well?" Junseo's question was like a knife piercing Jiho. He forced a smile, struggling against the urge to spill the whole truth right there. But he knew the impact would be too devastating. He needed to choose the right moment, and that night was not the time. "It was interesting," Jiho replied slowly. "Mr. Kim seemed impressed with Minji, but some things left me with a nagging feeling." Junseo raised an eyebrow, curious. Nagging feeling? What kind of things? Well, he asked Minji some questions about her ambition. He even asked how far she would be willing to go to achieve success. Jiho looked into Junseo's eyes, trying to gauge his reaction. Do you trust her completely, Junseo? That question made Junseo's smile falter for a moment. He frowned, clearly surprised. Of course I trust her. Why do you ask that? What did she say? Jiho hesitated. He wanted so much to protect Junseo, but he also knew that the truth, no matter how painful, was necessary. He needed to warn him before it was too late. Minji hinted that she might be willing to make some sacrifices to achieve success, Jiho said carefully, including sacrificing important people to her. Junseo fell silent for a moment, as if he were processing the words. He laughed, a nervous and uncertain sound. Hyung, you're exaggerating. Minji wouldn't be capable of that. She loves me. We're in this together. Are you sure? Jiho asked, more seriously now. Have you seen how she's been acting lately? Doesn't it seem like she's changing, becoming more distant, more focused on herself? Junseo shook his head, vehemently denying it. You're seeing things that aren't there. Minji is ambitious, yes, but that doesn't mean she would abandon me for something like that. She knows we can grow together, that we can achieve success as a team. Jiho sighed. He understood Junseo's desire to believe in Minji, but at the same time, he knew the truth was much more bitter. He needed to open his friend's eyes before it was too late. I just want you to be careful, Junseo, Jiho said softly. Mr. Kim is testing her, and I think Minji might be willing to play that game. Just stay alert. Don't trust blindly. Junseo looked at Jiho, and for the first time, there was a shadow of doubt in his eyes. He didn't want to believe that Minji was capable of something so cruel, but Jiho's words had planted a seed of uncertainty. I will talk to her, okay? I don't think it's anything, but I will ask. Jiho nodded, relieved to have at least started the conversation. Do that. I just want what's best for you, you know that. Junseo smiled, albeit forced. I know, Hyung, and I appreciate it, but Minji and I are fine, I'm sure. The two brothers fell silent, and Jiho knew that despite Junseo's words, he had planted the necessary doubt. Now, all that was left was to wait and see how the confrontation between Junseo and Minji would unfold. What he didn't know was that this confrontation was closer than he imagined, and that the revelation would be much more explosive than anyone could predict. The next day, Junseo woke up earlier than usual. The distant look in the mirror reflected a man in conflict, a man who was beginning to question the foundations of his relationship. What Jiho had said the night before wouldn't leave his mind, and as much as he wanted to believe blindly in Minji, the doubts were now planted and growing fast. He knew he needed to confront her, even if it could change everything. As the day went by, Junseo tried to focus on work, but his phone weighed in his pocket like an anchor. Every message from Minji, with her sweet and seemingly innocent tone, seemed more suspicious now. He knew he couldn't postpone the conversation. By the end of the afternoon, he made the decision to meet her and clear everything up. Minji was waiting for him in a stylish cafe in the city center. She was wearing a blue dress that enhanced her elegance, and the smile on her face was charming, as always. She seemed oblivious to the storm that was approaching. "Oppa, you arrived early today!" Minji exclaimed, with a light laugh as she quickly hugged him. "I missed you." Junseo forced a smile and sat down. but the tension between them was palpable. Minji, perceptive as always, quickly noticed that something was wrong. Her eyes studied Junseo with a mix of concern and curiosity. "Is everything okay?" "You have a strange expression?" she asked, leaning slightly over the table. Junseo took a deep breath, trying to find the right words to start. "Minji, I wanted to talk to you about something important, something that's been bothering me." Minji's eyes narrowed, the lightness in her face disappearing as the gravity of the situation became evident. "What is it, Oppa? What's bothering you?" "Last night, I talked to Jiho about dinner with Mr. Kim. He told me there were some conversations between you and Mr. Kim that made him worried. Things you said about being willing to make sacrifices to achieve your goals." Minji remained silent, but her eyes darkened momentarily. She was always one step ahead, always calculating, and now she realized she would need to handle this situation carefully. "I don't understand why this bothered you so much," Minji replied softly, maintaining her composure. "I just said I was determined to achieve my dreams, and sometimes, yes, we need to make tough decisions. That doesn't mean I'm going to sacrifice you, Junseo. I would never do that." But what Jiho heard was more than that. Junseo insisted, the pain in his voice more evident now. "He said it seemed like you were willing to leave me behind if necessary to get where you want." Minji held Junseo's gaze, her expression unwavering, but there was something there, a spark of something darker. She knew this moment would come, sooner or later. Deep down, Minji was aware that her ambition could end up destroying some relationships along the way. What she didn't expect was to be confronted so soon. "Do you really think I would do that?" Minji asked, her voice sweet, but now with a slightly manipulative tone. "Do you think after everything we've been through, I would just leave you for an empty dream? Please, Junseo, don't believe the rumors. You know me better than that." But Junseo hesitated. He had always trusted Minji, always believed her words. But now there was something more, a silent doubt growing within him. Jiho had planted that seed, and now it was blossoming. "I want to believe in you, Minji," Junseo replied, his voice weak, almost broken. "But something is changing in you, and I don't know if it's for the better. This obsession with success seems to be consuming you." Minji took a deep breath, and for the first time, her smile completely faded. She knew she needed to act quickly before everything fell apart. "Look, I understand that Jiho is worried. He just wants to protect you. But you need to trust me, Junseo. The success I'm pursuing is for both of us, so we can have the life we've always dreamed of." Junseo looked at her, conflicted. Part of him wanted to believe those words, wanted them to be true. But another part, a growing part, couldn't ignore the possibility that Minji was hiding something. I need some time to think," Junseo finally said, feeling the weight of the decision in every word. "I don't know what to believe anymore." The silence that followed was suffocating. Minji looked at him, her eyes now shining with something between anger and desperation. She had been challenged, and that was not something she tolerated easily. But for now, she knew that forcing things could be disastrous. "Of course," she said, her voice colder now. "I understand. Think about what you need, and when you're ready, we'll talk again." And with that, Minji stood up and left the cafe, her exit silent but heavy with meaning. Junseo remained there, alone with his doubts, unaware that this moment would mark the beginning of a point of no return. a path that would forever change the fate of everyone involved. The days that followed the conversation in the cafe were the loneliest for Junseo. He had asked for some time, but Minji's absence did not fill the growing void within him. It felt as if something inside him was in tatters, and instead of finding peace in the temporary separation, he found himself increasingly tangled in his own doubts. He knew something was wrong, but he couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. His thoughts constantly returned to what Jiho had said, to that subtle change in Minji that he had ignored for so long. The success and ambition that had once fascinated him about her now seemed like dangerous weapons, capable of hurting anyone in their path. Could this be true? Would Minji be willing to sacrifice their love in the name of something greater? One night, after a long journey of reflection, Junseo decided to talk to Jiho again. He needed more information, answers that would help clarify the chaos in his mind. He found his friend at the same bar where they had previously talked. This time, however, Jiho looked darker, with a worried expression that seemed to have intensified. "You talked to her, didn't you?" Jiho asked as soon as Junseo sat down beside him. Junseo nodded, still feeling the weight of the conversation in the cafe. "Yes." She said it was all a misunderstanding, that I'm overreacting. Jiho sighed, taking a sip of his beer before looking directly at his friend. "Junseo, I've known you for years, and I know Minji well enough to say she's not the same person you started dating. She's changed, man, and not for the better. I don't know what to do," Junseo admitted, his voice heavy with frustration. "I want to believe her, but it feels like I'm getting lost in this tangle of feelings." Jiho studied his friend for a moment before leaning in and lowering his voice. "There's something else you need to know, and I hesitated to tell you this before because I thought it might be too much for you. But now, I think you have the right to know." Junseo fell silent, feeling a knot in his stomach. Something inside him told him he wasn't ready for what was to come. "Minji isn't just interested in career success," Jiho continued. "There are rumors that she's getting involved with other influential people to secure her position. And I'm not just talking about business. I'm talking about something more intimate." Those words hit Junseo like a punch to the gut. He looked at Jiho, shocked, unable to fully process what he had just heard. "What are you trying to say?" Jiho bit his lip, looking uncomfortable with the situation. "I didn't want to be that guy, but I've heard that Minji has been spending a lot of time with Mr. Kim. And I'm not just talking about professional meetings. They've been seen together outside of work hours, and the way she acts around him, well, it's concerning." Junseo felt as if the ground was shifting beneath his feet. The idea that Minji might be romantically involved with someone else, especially someone like Mr. Kim, was something he simply couldn't bear. But at the same time, something about it all seemed to make sense. The distance between them, the constant work meetings, her changing attitude. "Are you sure about this?" Junseo asked, his voice almost a whisper, as if he hoped the answer would be a no. "I wouldn't tell you this if I wasn't almost certain," Jiho replied, his tone heavy. "I really hope I'm wrong, but I think you need to investigate on your own. You can't ignore this any longer." Junseo felt the room spin. Betrayal was something he had never realistically considered. Sure, he knew their relationship was in a complicated phase, but this felt beyond imaginable. On the way home, Junseo found himself lost in thought. Every moment he had spent with Minji, began to unravel in his mind, as if he were replaying all their interactions in a new light, searching for clues he hadn't seen before. How could he have been so blind? When he got home, Junseo made a decision. He needed to find out the truth. He could no longer live in doubt and fear. He knew where Minji usually met Mr. Kim, and, against his better judgment, decided to follow her to their next meeting. The following night, Junseo followed Minji to a fancy restaurant downtown. He watched from a distance, hiding around the corner of a nearby building. His heart raced every time he looked around, fearing she might see him. But she was completely oblivious to his presence, focused only on the person in front of her. And then he saw him, Mr. Kim. He approached Minji, and they greeted each other warmly, like old friends, or something more. Junseo felt his blood boil at the sight of their closeness. Minji's light laughter, the way she touched Mr. Kim's arm, everything felt incredibly intimate. Junseo knew he couldn't bear it any longer. He quickly stepped away from the scene, his heart broken, and his mind in turmoil. Now, he was certain that something was very, very wrong. That night, Junseo couldn't sleep. His body was tired, but his mind was on fire. He knew he needed to confront Minji again, but this time, not with doubts, but with certainties. At dawn, the next day, Junseo found himself in a state of numbness. The revelation from the previous night felt like a cold stone in his chest. Everything he had built with Minji, all the happy moments and shared promises, now seemed distant, erased by the image of her with Mr. Kim. He knew he could not postpone the confrontation any longer. The truth needed to be spoken.
Minji, as usual, left home early, ready for another day of meetings and responsibilities. Her leave without having a conversation. He called from the door while she grabbed her keys. His voice was cold.
Older than he had imagined. He turned surprised. Junso, what's wrong? I'm late for work. We need to talk now. Minji hesitated for a moment, looking at the clock, but his serious tone made her reconsider.
She stepped back and closed the door, crossing her arms in impatience. Okay, what's so important that it can't wait? Junseo took a deep breath. He needed to stay calm. I know about you and Mr. Kim. Minji's reaction was instantaneous. Her eyes widened, and her hands clenched slightly, a clear sign that she was caught off guard. But instead of giving in, she quickly adopted a defensive posture. What are you talking about? There's nothing between me and Mr. Kim. He's just my boss. I saw you last night. Junseo interrupted, his voice now firm and controlled. I saw you at the restaurant with him. It wasn't just a work meeting, Minji. I know what I saw. Minji blinked a few times, the shock still visible on her face. She seemed to be carefully choosing her next words. You followed me? You really followed me? The disbelief in her voice soon gave way to anger. How dare you, Junseo? I am your partner, not your prisoner. This is a total violation of my privacy. I don't care about your privacy when there are lies between us. Junseo shot back, his frustration finally overflowing. I tried to trust you, tried to ignore the signs, but what I saw last night... Minji, that was too much. Do you think you can just lie to me and go on as if nothing is happening? She shook her head, her expression alternating between anger and something that seemed like slight sadness. You don't understand. You never understood. Everything I'm doing is for us, for our future. Mr. Kim is an important figure, and I needed to be by his side to secure my advancement. Yes, maybe I got closer than I should have, but it was never about you. It was about what I wanted to achieve. Achieve at what cost? Junso asked, feeling desperation rising in his voice. Is our relationship worth nothing to you? Are you willing to throw it all away just to climb the career ladder? Minji was silent for a moment, her gaze fixed on the floor, as if she were reflecting on everything she had done. Then she took a deep breath and looked up at him. Junseo, I love you. But at the same time, I can't deny who I am. I've always been ambitious. I've always wanted more. And yes, I made mistakes along the way, but that doesn't mean I cheated on you. I never crossed that line with Mr. Kim. Her declaration, although sincere, did not bring the relief Junseo had hoped for. He wanted to believe her, desperately wished that it was all just a misunderstanding. But the images from the previous night continued to haunt his mind, clouding his judgment. You're asking me to believe you after everything I saw and heard? Junseo asked, his voice sounding weaker than he would have liked. How can I trust someone who lied about something so important? Minji stepped forward, her eyes locked onto Junseo's. I know you're hurt. I know I've hurt you with my distance and my focus on other things. But please, believe me when I say there was no betrayal. I did this for us. I wanted to build something great for both of us. But at what cost, Minji? Junso whispered, feeling the pain in his words. You can say you did it for us, but I feel more alone than ever. Silence hung between them for long seconds, as if both were trying to find the right words to fill the growing chasm between them. But there were no words that could fix what had been broken. Minji finally sighed, her shoulders slumping in defeat. I don't know what else to say, Junseo. If you can't trust me anymore, then maybe there's nothing more to be done. Those words were like a knife to Junseo's heart. He had spent so long fighting for that relationship, trying to fix what was broken. But now, faced with the cold reality, he wondered if there was anything that could be saved. Minji grabbed her keys, opened the door, and with one last look filled with pain, she left. Junseo stood there, the sound of the door closing echoing in his ears. He knew that this conversation had changed everything. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure if there would be a future for them. The house was incredibly silent without Minji. Her absence was palpable, and Junseo found himself wandering through the rooms, lost in thought. The decision he needed to make was clear: move on alone, or somehow try to restore the broken trust between them. But deep down, he knew that the answer was already before his eyes. The days that followed that confrontation were dark. Junseo spent most of his time alone, lost in thought. The emptiness that Minji had left was painful and hard to ignore. He repeatedly wondered if he had made the right decision by not insisting on a reconciliation. Maybe if he had trusted her a little more, if he had believed in her words, things could have been different. But he knew that trust, once broken, could not be easily restored. Minji, on the other hand, continued her routine as if nothing had changed. She worked hard and seemed to have immersed herself even more in her professional responsibilities. The ambition she had always carried now seemed to be her only companion. However, despite her apparent coldness, the distance between her and Junseo also affected her deeply. She might not admit it to herself, but she missed the life they had shared. One day, Junseo decided he could no longer stay in that state of inertia. He needed answers. If there was any chance of repairing the broken pieces of his relationship with Minji, he needed to know the whole truth. Determined, he went to Minji's office. It was time to confront her one last time, in an environment where there would be no excuses or distractions. When he arrived at Minji's building, he felt a knot in his stomach. It wasn't easy to relive all the pain of what had happened, but it was necessary. He took the elevator, his heart racing. Upon reaching the office door, he hesitated for a moment, but finally gathered the courage to enter. Minji was in a meeting, which gave him a few minutes to think about what he would say. When she finally left the room, her eyes met Junseo's, and for a moment she seemed surprised to see him there. It was unusual for him to show up in her workplace, especially after everything that had happened. "Junseo?" she asked, a mix of confusion and fatigue in her voice. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk," he said, trying to stay calm. "I can't stand this distance between us anymore. I need answers, Minji." She sighed, as if she had been anticipating this moment. "All right," she said, gesturing for him to follow her to a private room. There, away from the curious gazes of her coworkers, they finally sat down, face to face, at a small empty table. Junseo got straight to the point. "I'm not here for more accusations or arguments, Minji. I want the truth, just that. I need to know if what you told me that night was really real. If there was nothing more between you and Mr. Kim other than what you told me." Minji looked at him, her eyes fixed on his. She hesitated for a few seconds, as if she were carefully choosing her words. "Junseo, I told the truth. There was never anything physical between me and him. Yes, I got closer than I should have. And yes, I used that relationship to benefit myself at work. But I never crossed that line. I know I was wrong, that I hurt you by hiding this, but it was never more than that." He studied her face, looking for any sign of dishonesty, something that suggested she was still hiding the truth. But what he saw was sincerity, and perhaps even a bit of regret. It was hard for him, but for the first time in a long time, he believed her words. "I want to believe you, Minji," he said, his voice a bit softer now. "But you know that the trust between us has been shaken. I don't know how we could move forward like this." Minji bit her lip, clearly frustrated. "I know, Junseo, and maybe we can't move forward. Maybe it's too late to fix all this." There was a long silence between them. Junseo leaned forward, running his hands over his face. He was tired of fighting, tired of feeling so lost. "I didn't want it to be like this," he finally said. "I wanted us to find a way to get through this, to rebuild what we had. But it seems we are growing more distant." Minji looked at him sadly. "I didn't want it to end like this either. But sometimes, Junseo, things just don't work out. I love you, but I know that love is not enough to fix everything that has happened." Junseo nodded slowly. Her words were painful, but in a way, he had already expected it. Maybe their story had really come to an end. "So what will we do now?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. Minji took a deep breath before answering. "Maybe it's better for us to go our separate ways for a while. I'm not saying it's the definitive end, but we need space. We need time to understand what we really want." Those words hung in the air for a few seconds, and Junseo felt a tightness in his chest, although he didn't want to admit it. Maybe Minji was right. Maybe space was the only thing that could give them some clarity. Maybe it is, he agreed, reluctantly. They both remained silent for a while, both knowing that this was the beginning of an uncertain path. Neither of them knew what the future held for them, but one thing was certain. It was time to step back and reflect on what they really wanted from their lives. As Junseo left Minji's office, he felt a strange weight in his heart. It wasn't the relief he had expected to feel after getting his answers, but it also wasn't the same despair as before. It was a mix of acceptance and resignation, as if he was finally beginning to understand that love wasn't always enough. Minji, too, in her office, allowed herself a moment of silence. She knew that stepping away was the best solution for both of them at that moment, but that didn't make the decision any less painful. She had lost something precious, something she might never regain, and the future now seemed more uncertain than ever. Junseo's life after that conversation with Minji followed a rhythm he could no longer control. The office, once a place of constant activity and interactions with colleagues, now felt like an empty and purposeless space. Meetings and daily tasks had become just a backdrop for the thoughts that tormented him. He found himself constantly recalling every moment spent with Minji, trying to find clues in the past that indicated where things had begun to unravel. He caught himself on many occasions staring at his phone, wondering if he should call her, ask how she was, seek an answer for the emptiness he felt. But every time Minji's number appeared on the screen, his hand hesitated. He knew it wasn't the right time. There was a raw pain between them now, a deep space that seemed impossible to fill. Minji, for her part, was battling her own internal storm. Although she was a woman who had always valued her emotional control, her separation from Junseo had left her vulnerable in a way she hadn't anticipated. At work, she continued to show her professional side, but at night, alone in her apartment, she found herself lost in her own thoughts. Hours passed without her noticing, and days blended into a routine that brought no real meaning. What troubled her most was the fact that, although she had been the one to take the first step toward distancing herself, she still felt consumed by longing. She missed the way Junseo made her laugh, his silent hugs that said everything without a single word, the way he understood her with a depth that no one else could. But now, that connection felt like a distant memory, like a flame slowly dying out. In the second week after the confrontation, Junseo received an unexpected invitation to a significant corporate event, the kind of event he would normally avoid, but he knew it would be a mistake to skip it. With a sigh, he prepared himself. His outfit was impeccable, his hair carefully styled, but inside he felt like he was crumbling. The event was the kind of gala celebration that Minji would surely attend, and the thought of seeing her again in a public space was uncomfortable, but he had no choice. Upon arrival, Junseo was immediately surrounded by colleagues and clients. The atmosphere was elegant, with soft lights and low music, and everyone seemed engaged in conversations about business and small corporate gossip. He, on the other hand, was distant, his eyes scanning the room for a familiar face. And then he saw her. Minji was there, impeccable as always, in a dress that softly reflected the light of the venue. She was talking to one of her superiors, laughing with a naturalness that hit Junseo like a punch in the stomach. Everything about her seemed so distant, and yet so familiar. She looked well, but something in her posture indicated that she too was not completely present. He felt the urge to approach her, to speak to her, but with each step he took toward her, the fear of yet another rejection paralyzed him. She looked beautiful, but she was no longer the woman he once knew, at least not in the way he desired. "Junseo, are you okay?" The voice of a colleague brought him back to the present, interrupting his thoughts. Yes, of course. He forced a smile, trying to appear more at ease than he truly was. He turned to look at Minji once more, and noticed she was looking back at him. Their eyes met for a brief second, but the intensity of that moment was enough for them both to look away, each retreating to their own corner of the room. And it was in that instant that Junseo realized how much things had changed. What once felt natural now felt like an abyss between them. Minji, for her part, struggled against the urge to go to him. Every fiber of her being wanted to do so, to touch Junseo, and perhaps, in some way, reclaim what they had lost. But she knew that this was not the answer. Not at that moment. The days of insecurity, the moments of lies and omissions had created a barrier difficult to cross. Perhaps, with time, they could find a way to rebuild what they had lost, but now was not the time. As the event unfolded around them, they both seemed to be in completely different worlds, distant and isolated. Junseo and Minji, with their own ghosts, hidden beneath the appearance of normalcy, were irreparably far apart. They were no longer connected in the way they once were. The relationship, which once seemed like a safe harbor, had now transformed into a minefield of unspoken words and gestures that no longer held the same meaning. And so, in the midst of a night that should have been celebratory, they both found themselves isolated, each facing the pain of the emptiness they had created, and a future that now seemed irreversible. Minji returned home that night with a heavy feeling in her heart. Images of Junseo had etched themselves in her mind. He was there, but at the same time, so far away. She wanted him by her side, but she knew that their words and actions had opened a deep chasm between them, a chasm difficult to close. Junseo, for his part, felt the same anguish. As he drove home, the city streets seemed emptier than ever. The sound of the car engine felt distant, as if he were floating in a world where time stood still. What he wanted most was for things to be different, to turn back time and make the right choices. But what remained now was only an uncertain future, marked by the pain of separation. They both knew this was just a pause, a time to breathe. But deep down, they also knew that if there wasn't a significant change in their lives and in their hearts, all of this could just be the end of a story that shouldn't have ended. The next day started like any other, but something in the air suggested it would not be an ordinary day. Junseo woke up with the feeling that something important was about to happen, something he couldn't avoid, but also didn't know how to handle. He got up and looked out the window, watching the city slowly awaken. The streets were busy, but his mind remained distant, anchored in what he had seen the night before. Minji also woke up with a premonition. She got up from the couch, where she had slept while watching a movie, unable to really see anything. The images and sounds from the previous night were echoing in her head, and Junseo's presence seemed to be infiltrating every thought, even as she tried to resist. What they didn't know was that fate, in its unpredictable way, had already decided the course of events. They were both about to cross paths again, in a way that neither time nor distance could prevent. At the office, Junseo couldn't concentrate. He looked at the clock, which seemed to crawl. His mind kept drifting back to Minji, to her gaze, to the silence that hung between them. The conversation they had the night before seemed to have left an indelible mark on both of them. Even without saying a single word, there was something in that look that spoke more than 1,000 sentences. For her part, Minji was in the middle of an important meeting. She spoke firmly, answering her colleagues' questions with the same confidence as always. But inside, her mind was far away. The minutes dragged on, and with every second, the desire to resolve what had been left unresolved between her and Junseo grew stronger. Finally, in the late afternoon, their paths crossed. Junseo was leaving the office, his head full of thoughts, when he saw her. Minji, standing at the entrance of the building, was waiting for someone. She looked hesitant, almost as if she were expecting him to show up, as if fate was finally bringing them together. He paused for a moment, watching her from afar, his heart beating faster than usual. She was there, and he knew he couldn't ignore what that meant. Without thinking, Junseo walked up to her, and when they met, the silence was as thick as the air around them. Minji looked at him with a mix of surprise and sadness. There was no need for words at that moment. The pain, the longing, it was all there, visible in their eyes. "Junseo," Minji began, but her voice faltered. The words wouldn't come. She knew what she wanted to say, but the emotions were choking her. "I know," Junseo replied, his voice quieter than usual. "I feel it too. But I don't know what to do." They were both there, standing on the busy street, as if the world around them had vanished. The cold night wind brushed against their faces, but the feelings hanging between them were far more intense than anything the weather could bring. Minji looked at him, the pain clear in her gaze. She wanted to ask a question, wanted to understand what had happened, what had brought them to this point. But at the same time, she knew words were insufficient to explain. "I didn't want it to be like this," she finally said, her voice soft, almost broken. "I didn't want us to end up here." Junseo closed his eyes, feeling the anguish tighten in his chest. "I know," he murmured. "I didn't want it either. But we can't go back. What happened between us is bigger than both of us." For a moment, they both stood in silence, observing the emptiness between them, which now felt as real as any spoken word. They no longer needed explanations. The failures, the mistakes, the omissions were all there, needing no names. "I still love you, Minji," Junseo suddenly said, the confession spilling from his mouth like a release. The words fell between them like a bomb, breaking the silence and making the pain more palpable. Minji looked at him, surprised. She had heard it, but didn't know what to do with it. For so long, she had fought against her own feelings, trying to find a way to move on, and now he came with this confession that felt so definitive. "Junseo, I love you too," she replied, her voice hoarse and trembling. "But what are we going to do about it?" He didn't know. He had no answer. How could they move forward after everything? How could they rebuild something that seemed to be in pieces? "Maybe we need time," he finally suggested, his voice full of weariness. "Maybe with time, we can find a way to deal with this, to understand what it means." Minji looked at him, her heart heavy with uncertainty. They were at a breaking point. A point where they needed to decide whether to keep fighting or if what remained between them was irreparable. She knew she couldn't force a solution, but at the same time, she didn't want to give up on what they had been. "I don't know what the future holds for us, Junseo," she said, "but I know I can't continue like this. I need time, too." He nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the decision on his shoulders. They had no answers, no guarantees, but what they had, in that moment, was an opening for the possibility of a new beginning, something they both needed to explore, even with fear. "Then let's take that time," he finally said. "And who knows, in the end, we might find each other again." With one last look, they both walked away, heading in opposite directions, but with something new between them. It wasn't a solution, but an opportunity, a chance to rewrite their story, away from the shadows that had enveloped them. What would come next, no one knew. But one thing was certain. They were still deeply connected, and somehow that made all the difference. And so we come to the end of this exciting chapter of our story. But, like any good plot, it is far from over. What will happen to Junseo and Minji after this twist? Will the truth that has been hidden for so long finally come to light? Or will they have to make choices that will change their lives forever? Now, it's up to you. I really want to know your opinion on everything that has happened so far and what you think will happen next. Leave your comment, share your theories, and tell me what you think the characters should do. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell to be notified first about the upcoming videos. Activating the bell is very important because that's how you'll ensure you don't miss any details of our story, and you'll follow each new chapter as soon as it's released. And to continue this journey with us, at the end of this video, a link will appear on the screen for you to watch a new story that I prepared, full of surprises and unforgettable moments. So, wait for me there, so we can have fun together with another amazing plot. Until the next video.